Indicted, targeted, and under fire, Barron Trump faces the unbelievable at ocean, but how he handled it stunned everyone. The Elysian Voyager was a floating palace, its flashing white housing cutting painlessly through the calm waters of the Pacific. This was not just a voyage, it was an experience designed for those seeking unequaled luxury far from the chaos of everyday life. For Barron Trump, it was exactly what he demanded. Standing on the upper sundeck, he leaned against the polished, ranting the salty breath tousling his hair at just over 6 bases altitudinous. With a quiet, composed address, he'd grown into a man who preferred observation to spectacle. The distant horizon glowed with tones of orange and pink, the setting sun painting a masterpiece that not indeed the finest galleries could compete. Beside him stood Isabel, her auburn hair catching the light like fire. She was not a face the tabloids would fate, and that was purposeful. Isabel was smart, predicated, and fiercely private, a rare combination in Barron's world. She acclimated the scarf around her neck, glancing over at him with a sportful smile. "You are allowing too much," she teased, nudging his arm gently. Barron scowled, turning his aspect toward her. "Just enjoying the moment." "You are trying to enjoy it," she corrected, her tone warm, but knowing big difference. He laughed, vocally, the sound carried down by the wind. She was not wrong. Indeed, on this luxurious escape, he could not fully switch off. Times of public scrutiny had trained him to remain guarded, always apprehensive of how one print or eavesdropped comment could helical into weeks of captions. The cruise had been Isabel's idea, a chance for them to step down from the limelight and simply be themselves for the first 2 days. It worked. They wanted the boat like ordinary passengers, savoring exquisite refections, lounging by the pool, and marveling at the putatively endless ocean. At night, they rambled under a cover of stars, finding solace in the kind of quiet moments there. Usual lives infrequently swung, but not everyone aboard the celestial Voyager sounded as enchanted by their presence. Barron had noticed Captain Hargrove on several occasions, always watching, his sharp blue eyes moping a moment too long. Hargrove was a commanding figure, altitudinous and broad-shouldered, with the kind of grizzled authority that demanded respect. His livery was immaculate, his stride purposeful, but his aspect carried commodity, unsettling. "Have you noticed him gaping?" Barron asked Isabel one autumn as they lolled on the sundeck. "Who?" she asked, looking up from her book. "The captain." Barron said, seesawing subtly toward the man standing near the ground. Isabel followed his aspect. Hargrove was speaking to a crew member, but glanced their way. Just as she looked, his expression was undecipherable, but his attention dallied a beat too long before returning to his discussion. "He is presumably just curious," Isabel said, trying to brush it off. "You are not exactly anonymous." Barron lowered but said nothing. He had grown used to people gaping, but this felt different, like he was not just being watched, but estimated. Latterly, that evening as they dined in the opulent garden bistro, Barron could not shake the feeling of being under scrutiny. The captain made a brief appearance, moving through the dining area to hail guests. When he reached their table, he broke, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Enjoying your passage, Mr. Trump?" Hargrave asked, his tone polite but cropped. "Yes, thank you," Barron replied. His voice measured. Hargrave's aspect darted to Isabel, also back to Barron. "Good. Let me know if there is anything I can do to make your stay more memorable." With that, he turned and walked down, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Isabel gave Barron a questioning look, but he simply sighed, determined not to let the hassle ruin their evening. For a while it sounded like nothing further than an odd moment, a quip of a man used to running a tight boat, but deep down Barron could not ignore the apprehension it stirred. The Elysian Voyager might have promised a sanctuary down from the public eye, but commodity about this trip felt different, and soon they'd realize just how snappily a picture-perfect escape could take a dark and unanticipated turn. But when that tranquility shattered, no bone could have provisioned the storm that was about to gulf them all. The morning sun revealed across the Elysian Voyager as it glided across the open ocean, the gentle sway of the boat slightly conspicuous. Passengers moved through the balconies with a debonair air, belting their morning coffees or settling into sundeck chairpersons for a day of indulgent relaxation. Barron and Isabel stepped onto the boardwalk, their faces warmed by the sun and their spirits lifted by the vibrant atmosphere of the boat. Breakfast at the garden bistro had come, their favorite routine, positioned on the upper sundeck with panoramic views of the ocean. The boy offered a sense of peaceful detachment from the world. Tables were adorned with crisp white linens, and the soft clinking of flatware mingled with the sound of swells lapping against the housing. Isabel took a belt of lately squeezed orange juice, her aspect drifting across the tables. Families laughed over heaps of flapjacks, an aged gentleman read a thick paperback, and wait persons moved gracefully between the guests. It was the kind of scene you'd see in a trip folder. Impeccably serene you are, smiling, Isabel teased, leaning forward with a sportful Boo. Barron looked up from his plate, his lips entwining into a small grin. Am I not allowed to? It's just rare, she replied, her tone light but tender. Nice, though you feel happy. He leaned back in his president, exhaling as he let the moment marshland over him. Perhaps I'm, he admitted. At least then I am not that Joe from the captions. Just me. See, I told you this trip would be good for you, Isabel said, with a wink, popping a strawberry into her mouth. Across the sundeck, a group of children ran past, their horse laugh echoing through the air. Barron watched them with a faint smile, reminded of simpler times before his name came synonymous with contestation and scrutiny. But indeed, as he soaked in the tranquility, a flicker of apprehension dallied in the reverse of his mind. It was not just Captain Hargrove's jest that unsettled him. It was how out of place it felt amid the boat's polished fineness. Hargrove had passed their table before, admitting them with a curt nod, but his eyes dallied on Barron just a second too long. It was as if the captain were assessing him, trying to unravel commodity unseen. Do you suppose he is always like that? Barron asked suddenly. Who? Isabel replied, setting down her glass. The captain, Barron said, glancing subtly toward the ground where Hargrove stood talking to a crew member. Isabel followed his aspect. He's presumably just old Academy, you know, the kind of Joe who is all about order and respect. Perhaps, Barron murmured, though he was not entirely induced. As the day unfolded, the boat buzzed with exertion. The pool sundeck was alive with splashes and shouts as kiddies dove into the water, while grown-ups lolled with frozen drinks in hand. A live jazz band played soft melodies near the bar, creating a soundtrack of rest that sounded to melt down the worries of the passengers. Barron and Isabel wandered the balconies, stopping to browse the boats, exchange shops, and respect the sprawling ocean views. Isabel set up a delicate cuff in a jewelry store, and Barron surprised her by copying it before she could protest. Stop spoiling me, she reprimanded, though her smile betrayed her delight. It's not spoiling if you earn it, he replied with a boo. As evening approached, the expectation for the boat's formal fate grew. Guests returned to their cabins to change into their finest vesture, eager for a night of glamour. Barron and Isabel joined in taking their time to get ready. He chose an acclimatized cortege suit, while she wore a flowing emerald gown that made her look like she would stepped out of a classic Hollywood film. The grand chamber was a sight to behold, its high ceilings adorned with ornate chandeliers that cast a warm golden gleam. A string quintet played vocally in the corner as elegantly dressed guests belted champagne and mingled. Barron and Isabel entered arm in arm, their presence drawing subtle but conspicuous attention from the crowd. You're turning heads, Isabel rumored, as they made their way to the cotillion bottom. So, are you? Barron replied, spinning her gently as they moved to the meter of the music. For a while the weight of the outside world sounded to evaporate. They laughed, they danced, and for the first time in what felt like ever, Barron allowed himself to completely embrace the moment. But not everyone participated. Their joy from a deck above, Captain Hargrove watched in silence, his sharp features shadowed by the dim light. His hand rested on the ranting, his fritters beating in a slow, deliberate meter. His aspect was locked on Barron, his expression undecipherable but tense. A slavey approached the captain, offering him a glass of champagne. Hargrove gestured it down, his focus no way wavering. They always suppose they are untouchable, he murmured under his breath, his words drowned out by the music below. Back on the cotillion bottom, Barron and Isabel participated a quiet moment. As the music softened, he looked into her eyes, his hand resting gently on her midriff. This is perfect, Isabel said vocally. It is, Barron agreed, though the moping presence of Hargrove in his supplemental vision left a faint bite in his else perfect evening. But as the night grew, aged, the cracks in the boat's peaceful facade were about to widen, and no bone could provision the chaos that was brewing just below the face. The grand chamber of the Elysian Voyager was the epitome of fineness, its towering ceilings adorned with slinging crystal-clear chandeliers. Every detail, from the polished marble bottoms to the gold-featured columns, reflected a substance that made the passengers feel as though they'd stepped into another period. Soft strains of Classical music played in the background as guests mingled their horse laugh, mingling with the gentle clinking of spectacles. Baron and Isabel stood near the cotillion bottom, drooling with a couple they'd met before in the day. Isabel's emerald dress lustered under the golden light, catching steaming ganders from further than many of the attendees. Napoleon, ever the gentleman, wore his usual composed address, his polite grins and reserved discussion putting those around him at ease as they spoke. The massive doors of the chamber suddenly swung open with a force that silenced the room. The music stopped, medial note, and the collaborative hum of discussion dissipated, replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable quiet. All eyes turned toward the source of the dislocation. Captain Hargrove stood in the doorway, his assessing frame casting a long shadow over the polished bottom. His chapeau was missing, his generally pristine livery slightly oblique, and his face was flushed either from wrathfulness or alcohol, or both. In his right hand he held a half-empty glass of whiskey, the liquid sloshing as he stepped forward. "There he's," Hargrove bellowed, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. His eyes locked on Barron, who artificially uncurled his calm address, masking the apprehension washing beneath the face. The captain's words hung in the air, heavy with blameworthiness, the golden boy hiding out. "Then, like he is just one of us," Hargrove continued, his tone trickling with misprision. He stumbled slightly, catching himself on the edge of a table. Guests changed uneasy ganders, whispers splashing through the crowd as Hargrove's words sank in. Barron felt Isabel's hand strain around his arm, her pressure radiating through her grip. "What is he doing?" Isabel rumored, her voice slightly audible. Barron did not respond. His aspect remained fixed on the captain, studying him precisely. This was not the calculated misprision of a man simply administering his authority. This was particular. Hargrove began moving toward them, his way heavy and unsteady. "You suppose you can just walk in and waltzing around like you enjoy the place?" he wrangled. His voice grew louder with each step, his words warbling slightly. "You do not belong then, not you, not your kind." The room fell hugely silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Many passengers heaved, while others glanced at Barron, doubtful of what to anticipate. Captain Barron said unevenly, his voice calm but establishment, "You've had a lot to drink. This is not the time or place." "Oh, it's the perfect time," Hargrove shot back, slamming his glass down on a near table with a loud clatter. "You suppose I do not know who you are?" "I know exactly who you are. I have spent times watching people like you, entitled, arrogant, taking whatever you want without an alternate study. For the rest of us," Barron did not blench, though his casket tensed. He had faced public competitions ahead, but this was different. This was not a journalist ambuscading him with a question or a foreigner snapping prints. This was raw, undressed hostility. "Look, I do not know what you suppose I have done," Barron said, his tone steady but laced with quiet authority. "But I am not going to stand then and let you affront me or the people in this room." Hargrove laughed plaintively, the sound sharp and concave. "Oh, the Napoleon speaks. How noble!" He took a step closer, his voice lowering to a near scowl. "You do not belong then, and I am not the only bone who knows it." Isabel dragged at Barron's arm, her voice critical. "Let's just leave. This is not worth it." But Barron did not move. He met Hargrove's light head on, his expression calm but unyielding. "Captain, I am going to ask you to step back and take some time to cool off. Whatever this is, we can talk about it intimately. Hargrove barked, his voice rising again. No further secrets. People need to know the verity about you and your family. They need to see what you really are." The murmurs among the guests grew louder, pressure splashing through the room like an electric current. A crew member standing near the entrance took a conditional step forward, his face pale. "Captain, perhaps it's stylish if we step outdoors," he said cautiously, but Hargrove gestured him off. "Do and tell me how to run my boat." He snapped, his attention still locked on Barron. "This is not overspread, not by a long shot." Before the situation could escalate farther, two elderly officers approached the captain, their movements deliberate but non-combative. "Joe, we need to speak with you," one of them said, still placing a firm hand on Hargrove's shoulder. For a moment it sounded as though Hargrove might repel, but also he pulled down with a frustrated grunt, allowing the officers to guide him toward the exit. He cast one last regard at Barron, his eyes burning with resentment. "You will lament this," he murmured under his breath, before fading into the hallway. The chamber remained silent for several beats, the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air sluggishly. The music proceeded, but the gleeful atmosphere was gone. Exchanges were hushed, the guests swapping uneasy ganders. As they tried to reuse the scene, Barron exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he turned to Isabel. "Are you okay?" he asked vocally. She jounced, though her expression was still tense. What was that? I do not know, Barron admitted, but commodity tells me this is not over. But as the chamber settled back into an uneasy calm, the real storm was only just beginning to brew. The chamber was still abuzz with whispers long after Captain Hargrove was attended out. Guests gripped their spectacles a little tighter. Their polished small talk, replaced by muttered enterprise, the elegant atmosphere had been pierced, leaving a sense of apprehension that indeed the gentle strains of music could not mask. Barron and Isabel stood near the entrance, watching as the night limped back into its meter. "We should go," Isabel said vocally, her voice pigmented with solicitude. Barron jounced, his hand resting smoothly on the small of her reverse as he guided her toward the exit. Heads turned as they passed, whispers following them like a shadow. Isabel's grip on his arm tensed, but Barron kept his expression calm and composed. Indeed, as his mind contended, the corridors outside the chamber were quieter, the hum of the boats, machines the only sound accompanying their steps. Isabel let out a shaky breath, her voice low but critical. "Barron, what just happened? Why would he come after you like that?" "I do not know," Barron replied, his voice steady, but his jaw tense. It felt particular, though he was not just venting. "He is holding on to commodity." Isabel lowered. "Perhaps he is just unstable or drunk. Either way, this does not feel safe." Barron glanced around the empty hallway, his eyes narrowing as he considered her words. "It's further than that. Did you hear what he said about my family? This is not arbitrary." Isabel dithered, her brow furrowed in concern. "Do you suppose he believes one of those conspiracy propositions, the bones they spread online about your family? It wouldn't be the first time," Barron said plaintively. He broke his aspect distant for a moment, but this felt different. He sounded certain, like he has some kind of particular grudge. As they reached their suite, Barron swiped his crucial card and pushed the door open, holding it for Isabel. Formerly inside, the familiar luxury of their cabin did little to ease the pressure hanging in the air. Isabel perched on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her stage. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Still, Barron leaned against the wall, crossing his arms as he considered his options. "If I report him, this whole thing becomes a caption. Barron Trump confronts deranged captain. It will helical out of control, and no bone will watch about what really happened." Isabel lifted her head, studying him. "So you are just going to do nothing?" "No," Barron said forcefully, "but I need to figure out what he is holding on to. If this is about me or my family, I cannot just ignore it." She stood, closing the distance between them. "You are not going to defy him, are you? That man is dangerous, Barron. You saw how he acted tonight." "I am not going to do anything reckless," Barron assured her, "but if he comes at me again, I am going to handle it. I am not going to let him keep this boat in chaos just because he has a chip on his shoulder." Isabel soughed, her shoulders rising slightly. "I just do not want you to get hurt. This was supposed to be our escape." Flashback. Barron placed a hand on her impertinence, his expression softening. "I know, and I am not going to let him ruin it for us. Whatever this is, I will make sure it does not go any further." The night stretched on, but Barron set up no rest. Long after Isabel had fallen asleep, he lay awake, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Hargrove's words replayed in his mind, each blameworthiness cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. He had spent his entire life under the weight of his family's name, bearing the mass of both admiration and enmity. But this was different. Hargrove's wrathfulness was not fueled by idle gossip or unwarranted rumors. It carried a sharp, deliberate edge that suggested a commodity deeper. By the time dawn broke, Barron had made up his mind. He could not stay for Hargrove to make the coming move. Whatever the captain's provocations, Barron demanded answers before the situation entwined any farther. The first occasion came latterly that morning during a meeting with the boat's head of security. After the events of the former night, the crew had decided to keep a near eye on Hargrove, whose jest had raised red flags among indeed his most pious officers. "We have reviewed some of the security footage from last night," the officer explained, his tone measured. "It's concerning their substantiation that," he murmured, rising from his president. Barron stood, as well his aspect steady. "No, it's not, but this is the wrong way to handle it, Captain. Whatever you suppose you are proving, it's not going to work." Hargrove glared at him, but said nothing as he stormed out of the room, leaving Barron alone. As Barron stepped back into the hallway, the elderly crew members, staying outside, looked at him expectantly. "What happened?" one of them asked. "He is angry," Barron said simply, "but this is not just about me. He is holding on To commodity bigger commodity particular, but as the day unfolded it came clear that Hargrove's vendetta was only the face of a deeper, more dangerous storm brewing aboard the boat. The pressure aboard the Elysian Voyager had shifted from whispers to outright enterprise. By noon, it was clear that the events of the former night had come the talk of the boat. Passengers dallied in common areas, their exchanges pointed by quick ganders toward the ground or muttered propositions about what the captain might do coming. Barron and Isabel were attended to the boat's security office by two elderly officers. The crew had been on high alert since the chamber incident, and new developments suggested that the situation was far more complex than anyone originally believed. Inside the small sterile room, a row of observers displayed live footage from security cameras posted throughout the boat. The head of security, a stoic man named Officer Perez, stood by the press, his face grim. He signaled for Barron and Isabel to sit, his tone calm but serious. "We've uncovered fresh information about Captain Hargrove's jest. Perez began. "It appears he's been tracking your movements since the day you boarded. His conduct last night were not impulsive, they were calculated." Perez clicked many buttons on the press, and one of the observers lit up with footage from the chamber. Barron and Isabel watched as the events of the former night played out on the screen. The captain's erratic entrance, his heated battle with Barron, and the eventual intervention by the crew. But also Perez rewound the footage, stopping at a frame that showed Hargrove in a hallway just outside the chamber. He was pacing, his hands waving hectically, as if arguing with someone. In his hand was a phone, and as the footage zoomed in it came clear he was looking at a composition on the screen. "What is he reading?" Isabel asked, leaning forward. Paris enhanced the image. The textbook was vague but comprehensible enough to make out a caption: "Trump family allegations resurface, maritime disaster sparks new questions." Barron lowered his jaw, tensing. "That is from last week. It's a mega-hit piece tying my family to a shipping company that cut corners. Times ago, they claimed it led to a major accident, but it was no way proven." Perez jounced. "It seems the captain took it tete-a-tete, grounded on our findings. His family was involved in that disaster. One of the victims, Hargrove, may have connected your family to his loss. Whether it's true or not." Isabel's face blanched as she reused the information. "So this is not just resentment, it's grief, and he is condemning you for it." Barron's voice was calm but bent. "I had nothing to do with that company. My father's business dealings were separate from whatever happened, but Hargrove does not watch about the verity. He just wants someone to condemn." Perez signaled to another screen, this one showing a series of emails recaptured from the captain's account. "There is more. He has been in contact with an intelligencer who specializes in uncovering high-profile dishonors. From what we can tell, he planned to blunder fabricated information about you and your family." Barron exhaled, his expression undecipherable. "So this whole thing was about making a spectacle, it appears." "So," Perez replied, but he did not anticipate how far it would curl. Grounded on his jest, he is not allowing easily. That makes him changeable and dangerous. The intercom in the security office crepitated to life. Slice through the silence. "Perez, we have got a situation." A voice said urgently. "The captain's on the intercom again. He is addressing the passengers." Perez's eyes widened, and he turned to the press, switching to the boat's public advertisement system. Hargrove's voice came through, sharp and filled with wrathfulness. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone trickling with bitterness, "you've each been enjoying a lovely voyage, haven't you? But how numerous of you know the verity about who you are participating? This passage with the privileged son of a loose dynasty walking among us, as if he is one of us. Barron Trump and his family have taken everything from people like me, and they continue to get down with it." Gasps and murmurs echoed through the security office as Perez snappily muted the broadcast. "He's raising." Perez said, his voice cropped. "We need to stop this now." Isabel looked at Barron, her solicitude apparent. "You cannot let him control the narrative. If you stay quiet, he is going to keep spinning this story until everyone believes it." Barron jounced sluggishly, his expression hardening. "You're right, I need to defy him, but on my terms." Perez did. "The defying him could be parlous. He's unpredictable, and there is no telling how he will reply." "I am not hysterical of him," Barron said forcefully, "but I will not let him keep turning this into a spectacle. I need to face him and put an end to this." Perez soughed, "But ultimately Jounce will back you up. But be careful, this is not just about you. Presently he's dragging everyone on this boat into his vendetta." As Paris and his platoon worked to detect the captain, Barron took a moment to undergird himself. Isabel stood by his side, her voice soft. "But bet you do not have to do this alone." "Yes, I do," Barron replied, his tone calm, but determined. "This is my fight, but I will make sure it does not hurt anyone." Additional twinkles. Latterly, Perez's platoon located Hargrove in the boat's control room. Barron followed the officers to the narrow corridor outside, his mind racing. He was not sure what he'd say, but one thing was clear: this demanded to end. But as Barron approached the control room, he could not shake the feeling that Hargrove's wrathfulness was only part of a much larger, more dangerous verity. Staying to be uncovered. The control room of the Elysian Voyager was a stark discrepancy to the boat's spangling finest, functional and utilitarian. It buzzed with the low hum of ministry and the faint murmur of radio chatter. Captain Hargrove stood at the helm, his hands gripping the edge of the control panel with white-knuckled intensity. His livery, though neatly pressed, could not mask the disheveled, erratic energy expiring from him. Barron entered the room, adjoined by Paris and two elderly officers. Isabel had wanted to come, but Barron claimed she stay behind. This battle was not commodity. She demanded to witness firsthand. His calm surface belied the storm of feelings swirling within him: wrathfulness, frustration, but also a strange resoluteness to understand the man who had turned his holiday into an agony. Hargrove turned as the door clicked shut, his piercing blue eyes narrowing when he saw Barron. "So you decided to show up?" he said, his voice trickling with misprision. "I am, then, because I want this to end," Barron replied, unevenly stepping forward. "This has gone too far, Captain. Whatever you suppose you are proving, it's only hurting yourself and everyone differently on this boat." Hargrove laughed plaintively, shaking his head. "You suppose I watch about what happens to me? This is not about me, kid. It's about justice. Your family has taken everything from people like me. You represent everything that is wrong with this world." Barron's brow furrowed. "You keep saying my family has taken everything. Tell me what that means. What happened to you?" The room fell silent for a moment, save for the faint sound of swells crashing against the housing. Hargrove's aspect hardened, but his voice faltered as he spoke. "You wouldn't understand. People like you, no way do. My family was on the ocean horizon. He was part of the crew when that boat went down. Because of cost, slice, and rapacity, he went down with it." Barron's eyes softened. He flashed back the sea horizon tragedy, a shipwreck that had made captions for months, its fate steeped in contestation over safety violations. His father's company had been mentioned in early reports, though the allegations were latterly debunked. Still, the damage had been done in the public. I am sorry for your loss," Barron said unfeignedly, "but my family was not involved in what happened. I understand why you are angry, but your blame is lost. Hargrove snapped, his voice rising. "Your father's company was part of the same web of corruption that allowed that boat to sail. He may not have inked the papers, but he knew people like him always know." Barron took a step closer, his voice calm, "But establishment indeed. If that were true, you're chastising the wrong person. I did not make those opinions. I was not indeed old enough to understand them. Whatever my father did or did not do does not define me. You are letting your wrathfulness destroy your judgment." Hargrove's grip on the control panel tensed, his body pulsing with slightly subdued emotion. "You do not get it. You people like me do not have the luxury of walking down from our pain. We carry it every day, while people like you move on without an alternate study." "I do get it," Barron said, his voice steady but pigmented with empathy. "I know what it's like to live under the weight of someone differently's conduct. I know what it's like to be judged for effects you did not do, but that weight does not have to consume you." The room grew still, the pressure palpable. As Hargrove sounded to scuffle with Barron's words, his eyes flitted with query, the wrathfulness that had burned so fiercely now mingling with commodity. Additional grief. Perez stepped forward cautiously. "Captain, it's over. Let us help you." Hargrove's shoulders drooped, the fight draining from him as he leaned against the press. I wanted someone to see," he muttered, "to understand what it's like." "I see it," Barron said vocally, "and I know it's not fair, but this is not the way to make effects right. Let the crew handle this. Let them help you." Hargrove jounced noiselessly, his eyes glistering with unshed gashes. The officers moved imprecisely, placing a hand on his arm as they led him down. He did not repel. As the door closed behind them, Barron exhaled deeply, his countenance eventually cracking as the weight of the battle settled on him. He leaned against the press, gaping out at the endless breadth of ocean. Twinkles. Latterly, Isabel burst into the room, her face etched with solicitude. "Are you okay?" she asked, rushing to his side. "I am fine," Barron said, his voice quiet. It's over. She placed a hand on his impertinence, her eyes searching his. You should not have had to deal with that. None of this was your fault. I know, Barron replied, his tone bent. But if I did not defy him, he might have hurt someone differently. At least now he will get the help he needs. The boat's crew worked snappily to restore order, and by the time the Elysian Voyager docked, the incident had formerly made captions. Intelligencers climbed for details, eager to paint the story as another reproach tied to the Trump name, but passengers who had witnessed the events firsthand told a different story, one of countenance, compassion, and courage in the face of chaos. As Barron and Isabel disembarked, a passenger approached them, a middle-aged man who had watched the chamber battle unfold. I just wanted to say you handled yourself with class back there, the man said. Not everyone could have done that. Thank you, Barron replied, offering a faint smile as they walked toward the terminal. Isabel slipped her hand into his. Do you suppose this changes anything? She asked. Barron glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. Presumably not. People will believe what they want to believe, but that does not count. What matters is how we handle ourselves. That is all we can control, she jounced, squeezing his hand. And you handled it better than anyone differently could have. Barron smiled noiselessly, the weight of the experience still heavy on his shoulders, but tempered by a quiet sense of peace. For the first time in a long while he felt like he would proven commodity, not to the world, but to himself. Life is not about what is thrown at us, it's about how we rise to meet it. In the end, it's not the opinions of others that define us, but the choices we make when no bone differently is watching. If the story moved you, do not forget to like, partake, and subscribe for further stories that challenge us to suppose, reflect, and grow.